Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.
I'm John Kelly with NewsInsideOut.com, and we're here today with one of our author interviews with author Joshua Greene to discuss his new work, Swami in a Strange Land. In 1965, a 70-year-old man set sail from India to America with a few books in his bag, pennies in his pockets, and a message of love in his heart. He landed in New York at the peak of the revolutionary counterculture movement of the 1960s and went on to spark a global spiritual renaissance that led to the creation of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Author Joshua M. Greene has produced films for PBS and Disney, has served as vice president for New York's largest PR firm, and was appointed director of strategic planning for the United Nations Peace Summit of Religious and Spiritual Leaders. He was also an adjunct professor at Hofstra University in New York. He's the author of numerous works, and in 1970, he was initiated as Yogeshwar Das by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and served for 13 years in Prabhupada Society as director of French language publications. Joshua Greene, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Tell us, who was Prabhupada and what was his journey in life all about?
Prabhupada was the most recent link in an ancient lineage of teachers known as the Gaudiya Sampradaya, which is a devotional history, a culture of India that dates back to pre-recorded times. And his journey was to bring those teachings out of India to the West at the request of his teacher, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And in 1965, he did just that. He lived for 12 years in the West, passed away in 1977. And by then, he had achieved his teacher's request, I think, beyond even his own expectations.
And so, what was the essence of the teaching, and what was it that captivated people in that time? Why was he so successful in reaching his audience?
Well, that's the right question. There are scholars who would argue that, in large measure, Prabhupada's success in bringing the bhakti or devotional yoga tradition to America was a function of that moment in time. I mean, you may recall, as I do, what life was like here in the mid-'60s. We were flexing new muscles, looking for alternative solutions to war and inequality. And the message that Prabhupada brought, which was the millennial teachings of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, spoke directly to those issues. He espoused the knowledge of the self as an immortal spark of God, a divine essence, different from the external body and the race, religious, ethnic background of the body. So there was a universalism to his teachings. And that by cultivating a knowledge of ourselves as eternal souls, we could know the peace that had so eluded us through other channels, military, economic, governmental, etc. So he spoke to a generation of seekers, and he did so in a way that appealed to the deepest yearning of people's hearts for substantial spirituality. I mean, remember, this was also a time when the gates had opened and all of these teachers were coming into America. The Asian Exclusion Act had been repealed in 1962, I believe. And teachers from India and Asia who otherwise had no access to America were coming and setting up their shops and their schools and their teachings. And so there was this marketplace of spirituality in the 60s. Prabhupada, among all of those many teachers, was the one who insisted that the purpose of yoga, the purpose of all spiritual disciplines, is to know ourselves as eternal beings and our relationship with the Supreme Being through love and devotion.
So this teaching emphasizes a personal relationship with God.
That's the essence. That was the heart of Prabhupada's achievement, that he revealed the face of God at a time when people's impressions of Indian philosophy and spirituality were a kind of monistic loss of ego and a merging of the self with the totality of all creation. In other words, we become God. That was the popular idea. Prabhupada corrected that misimpression by describing and offering evidence that we are qualitatively one with the totality of creation. Qualitatively, we are one with Brahman, with the energy that constitutes all existence. But quantitatively, we remain very small. The individual soul remains a spark. Just as a drop of water, if it merges with the ocean, it may appear to have lost its identity, but that drop never becomes the ocean. It's still an individual drop. So the soul also retains its individuality, its personhood, even after liberation. And that was new. We had not heard that prior to Prabhupada coming here.
This is a very interesting and subtle point. This idea of merger into the cosmic consciousness, this is one of the terms is samadhi describes this. And as you've just stated, that under those conditions that the soul, the sense of individuality is maintained even under conditions of samadhi. Is that correct?
Yes, it's important to understand why. There's a logic to that. I mean, if by definition spirit is the opposite of matter, and matter is perishable, then the eternal self must be immortal. Okay, that works. If the self in this world is ignorant of its true nature, then the self in its liberated state must be fully cognizant. Okay, that also works. The self in this world is covered by darkness, by forgetfulness. Therefore, in the eternal realm, there must be light and full clarity of being. That also works. But by that same material logic, we would assume that because in this world, everything is individual, distinctive, differentiated, people are different from other people, objects are different from other objects, in the eternal realm, there must be no differentiation. We have to be free from that sense of individuality, the ego that makes us think we are separate from everything else. That doesn't quite work. What we're doing there is dragging our material impressions into a position of transcendence, and that's where the mistake is. There is eternal individuality. We just don't have any experience of it.
Very interesting. And so the individual, this is a very powerful idea in Western culture. And so Prabhupada arrived in a culture steeped in concepts of rugged individualism, the pioneer spirit, the cowboy. These were the icons of Western heritage. And as you said, in terms of philosophical differences, Eastern philosophers have been criticized for passivity, so to speak, the sense of the individual and the self was not. Was it fair to say we didn't have any Marlboro men in ancient India? Is that correct?
Well, there may have been some sense of the maverick sadhu, the Naga Babas or other spiritual rebels that perhaps fit that description. But you are raising a significant point. I mean, what we have to ask ourselves is, why would someone be attracted to the idea of losing identity? Why would the idea be interesting of becoming one with all of creation? And, we can point to certain philosophical arguments that it makes no sense to say that everything originates with an individual divinity. How can anything that's limited by form encompass the totality of all creation? I mean, we can come up with all kinds of, if it's Krishna, then it's not Jesus. There's a sectarianism to it. I think, John, the real reason why people have been attracted to the idea of becoming one with everything is that being a person is really hard. Being an individual is just problematic. All of our problems and woes come from other people. So you want me to get involved with being a person eternally? Do you think I'm crazy? So there's a kind of a natural reaction against the idea of retaining personhood eternally.
All right, and so as you say, the individual there are limitations that the individual encounters, and persisting with those limitations infinitely would be a problem.
Sure. Imagine being free of all of the responsibilities and woes and cares and trials and tribulations and drama over all of the people who make your life miserable. Imagine for a moment being free of all responsibility of being a person and just being able to float free. There's something initially attractive about that. Wow, what a relief that would be. But how long will that actually engage us? How long just floating around are we actually going to be happy in that condition? Mm-hmm. Because consciousness is individual and alive and an active proposition, because we are people eternally, we're going to want eventually to get back into some kind of an engagement with others. The Bhakti tradition says, do that in a healthy way. The reason why you're repulsed by the notion of individuality is that the relationships have been unhealthy for so long. Bhakti is a reform of character so that the relationships we establish on the spiritual level are healthy and satisfying and ongoing.
From some perspectives, particularly in a youth culture, there may be perceptions that pursuit of a spiritual lifestyle may serve as a means of escape from duties and responsibilities. And yet what I'm gathering from your statements is that in the highest states of consciousness, there occurs this desire to do some great work in the world and assume some great burden for the sake of society or for the sake of the universe consciousness.
That would be very advanced, yes. That's a very advanced stage. In Buddhism, that would be called the bodhisattva, someone who postpones his own entrance into nirvana in order to stay in the world and out of compassion, share that knowledge for the benefit of others. In the Bhakti tradition also, the great teachers didn't stay away. They went into the society and embraced, if you want to call it spiritual social action, perhaps you could call it that. But that's, there's a phrase in Sanskrit, paradukha dukhi, which means that the only suffering that a devotee feels, someone who has awakened his own love for God, is the suffering of others, that there are other people out there who are in terrible situations, and so we reach out to them as the highest form of dharma or service.
They're able to hear the heartbeat of the universe, so to speak.
Very nice, yes.
In terms of the life of Krishna, we could say that Krishna, the king, sacrificed the comforts of an empire to engage in constant struggle throughout his life. He didn't just rest on his laurels and accomplishments, but would continuously engage in struggle, one of those struggles being the Mahabharata war.
Yes, certainly Krishna in his manifest Leela in the world demonstrated his love for all beings, his own parts and parcels. In fact, it's described that what distinguished Krishna appearing in his original form from the lives and missions of other avatars is that other avatars came with some kind of purpose to fulfill, either to reestablish the kingdom as Rama did, or to bring down evildoers. Krishna came and danced. He looked to attract people by his beauty and sweetness. And yes, there was the Mahabharata war where he reestablished the teachings in the world through Arjuna and what we now call Bhagavad Gita. Very important text. But ultimately, that same Krishna from the battlefield of Kurukshetra is even more revered as the Krishna of Vrindavan, the child who came to attract souls by the sweetness of his pastimes.
So this is the discussion about Vraja Krishna and the notion of Leela, that the enchanting presence of Vraja Krishna transforms everything into a paradise-like experience.
I think that was Prabhupada's mission. I think when Prabhupada came to the West, he wanted to disavow this notion of God as some kind of top-down dictator, some refuge for lost souls, and establish the personhood of divinity as the ultimate fulfillment of the human calling, which is to love. Philosophy is nice, but it doesn't really change hearts. I mean, that's something that I learned writing this book, Swami in a Strange Land, is that while Prabhupada taught the philosophy very purely, what compelled people to take to a Krishna devotional life was his character and his example of someone who just had great love for all living beings. He came to inspire others to live like that too.
What were the circumstances under which you first met Prabhupada?
Maybe like you and a bunch of other people our age. I was a lost child of the 60s and kind of wondering what it's all about, Mrs. Jones. And at the time, I was a student at the Sorbonne in Paris. And a devotee who had been there to start a Krishna center in 1969 said, my teacher, Prabhupada, is in London right now. Why don't you go and meet him? It's very rare to meet a pure devotee of God. I had no idea what he was talking about. But when he said that Prabhupada was living with John Lennon, I got on the next boat train to London and showed up at the Krishna temple on Bury Place off Little Oxford Street by the British Museum, and walked in, and they were having lunch in this beautiful vegetarian spread. So I sat down, and they asked me about myself. I said, well, in school, studying literature. Really, what else? Well, I play organ in a rock band. Really? Come with us. So we traipsed out and got into this little Volkswagen minibus. I don't know if you remember the Volkswagen minibus. Probably the worst car ever allowed on the roads. And we're kind of rocking back and forth on our way to someplace. I said, where are we going? They said, you'll see. You're welcome to Krishna's band. You're in Krishna's band. So we show up about 15 minutes later. They open the door, and there in front of me is a door with the number 3 on it. And I'm thinking, 3? I'm looking up and down the street, and I realize it's Savile Row. 3 Savile Row. This is Beatles headquarters. Now, for your listeners who may not have been around in 1970, the Beatles were pretty much, the wise men of our age. And whatever they were into, we wanted to know what it was. So I walked in, and sure enough, we go down into a studio in the basement of the building, and there's George Harrison, skinny as a string bean, hair down to his waist, and wearing badges, Krishna badge and a Yogananda badge and a Prabhupada badge, and he's got neck beads around his neck, the whole paraphernalia. And they hand me a harmonium, this hand-pumped instrument, and I start playing along as they're recording an album of Indian devotional music. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, let me get this straight. If I hang out with these people, I get God and the Beatles. Okay. All right, I'm in. That was pretty much how it started.
Very, very high energy experience. As you say, these very powerful personalities and powerful cultural figures surrounding the teacher and the teachings at that time.
It was an irresistible combination.
Certainly, a very powerful attraction. The musicians had great love for chanting and the Maha Mantra. It spoke. I guess the teaching spoke to them in their language. There was a musical element to the teaching.
Yeah, there was some understanding that spiritual sound had an important role, a central role to play in the awakening of consciousness. I'm not sure that people understood the background, the philosophical background to that, but there was a fairly uniform acceptance among the pop music world and the poetry world. And I mean, Allen Ginsberg used to come around the temple in 1966 when Prabhupada first arrived in the West, and he'd been chanting Hare Krishna already for a long time. And then when George Harrison recorded the Krishna mantra, it went global. I remember back in those days, George had his manager book us on the UK television show Top of the Pops, which was the most popular television show on British television. And so here we are chanting these sacred mantras. These are sacred prayers, with clouds of smoke going all around us from dry ice and disco girls dancing in miniskirts. It was like this very unusual combination of ingredients. But yeah, those were some wild times.
Were you a part of those broadcasts?
Yeah. I would be along to play the harmonium and sing in the chorus, and it was very exciting. It was very, I turned 66 in June, next month, and one of the things that's kind of been on my mind is how I really don't want to lose the enthusiasm I knew as a younger boy for that spiritual journey, for that engagement in devotional life. It's easy to do. The older you get, the body just doesn't create the same endorphins and chemical supports anymore for the taking on great enterprises, which is what made Prabhupada's achievement so memorable, so amazing, that he started at the age of 70. I mean, this is when other people were retiring, and setting up folding chairs on Collins Avenue in Miami or whatever. Here he was starting a worldwide mission.
Yeah, it's almost like an incredible final attempt at the closing chapters of one's life to summon such resources and create a worldwide phenomena is an amazing story unto itself. And I'm sure, as you said, the book emphasizes the accomplishments of Prabhupada in this way. I'm gathering from our talk so far several things and impressions. One is related to this notion of the personal. The Vraja Krishna story, as is told in the ISKCON publications, the film, for example, the Bollywood film made about Vraja Krishna depicts Vishnu in bliss. Incarnating, coming to this planet, as you said, where there are so many ups and downs and changes and problems, going from this infinite bliss to sacrifice that state of comfort to come here. It seems like, somebody's making a great effort on the behalf of the rest of us who are trying to figure out, what's going on. And at the same time, in terms of the social manifestation of the teachings and the teacher himself in the 1960s, Prabhupada, coming and being available personally. I mean, my understanding is he was in Central Park under a tree, accessible to the public when he was first starting, and this personal connection in perhaps a climate of the impersonal, in the military war complex culture of the day. Perhaps this is part of the responses. There was personal engagement and personal experience, like the potential for personal spiritual experience came up, and this whole idea of the personal versus the impersonals seems to color, in my mind, so far in our discussion, that some of the reasons for success in Prabhupada's mission.
That's well said, John. Yes, I agree with you there. It may just be the single most important, how to say that, maybe in the future, when people look back on our time, the time that we're living in right now, the greatest failing they would point to will be the failure to be warm-blooded, caring people, friends for one another. Mm-hmm. That there's so much hostility and suspicion and party politics going on, and we're not going to get into the elections, but that may be the single greatest failing of all, is we're not acknowledging one another as part of the same family, and we really are. I mean, that's the message of the Vedas, of the ancient Sanskrit texts, is that all life, everything that we call alive, is our family. And we're all sparks emanating from that same original source. And that cuts through all differences of religion, creed, ideology, and really gets to the heart of the human experience. And Prabhupada embodied that. I know for myself, I don't think I would be where I am if I had not met him and come face to face with someone who really knew how to love other people. I don't think I'd ever seen real love, before I met him. And here was someone, I was a nobody, and he honored me with the attention and the care and concern of a family member, and that made me sit up and take notice.
So we could draw from that, from the cosmic perspective, everybody is a somebody, everybody is part of this universal family.
Yeah, it's harder to do it than to say it. And I'll grant you that. We all walk around with our insecurities and our doubts about our self-worth and our bitterness over not being where we thought we would be by now in life, or our frustration over not having achieved what we've wanted to achieve, or whatever it may be. And I think sometimes we're more comfortable living with those miseries just because they're familiar to us.
Yeah.
And the notion of embarking on a spiritual path, which can take me who knows where. I mean, that knowledge is very powerful, and it can be off-putting, if it's handled poorly, which is, I think, another big thing. If anyone is looking to embark on a spiritual path, just be prepared. It can be overwhelming. The knowledge that you're not the body, that you're an eternal soul, that there's a conscious source behind creation, that we have a relationship with that source. The first sensation, and this is described in the Bhakti texts, the first thing that happens when you come to the path of devotional yoga is this, this big sense of relief. Wow, you mean I'm not the sum total of all these traumas that I'm living with, for so many years? I'm something different. I'm something better, something more beautiful and complete than that. Wow, isn't that fantastic? And then there's a tendency to indulge in that sensation because it feels so good. The real work is harder. The more mature way to approach spiritual life is not just to enjoy that sense of relief from not being a material entity, but to really get into the discipline. Excavating ego and coming to a place of really acknowledging others is hard work. It doesn't come easy. Anyone who says, it's just, hey, just chant this mantra and be happy, and that's it, they're, either they've never really taken to a spiritual path, or they're bewildered by what's involved.
Very good. So this point that you've raised comes back to your earlier comments related to the power of sound and its invocative powers to spirit. And you've just clarified that there is this idea of the magic bullet solution. Some minimalist effort will produce the maximum result. It seems to me that this idea of spiritual path is about engagement, and there is struggle and even crisis can come up during that process. But it is a real hands-on, hands-dirty kind of experience. It's visceral. It's all engaging, not simply an intellectual, a formula on a blackboard.
Yeah, I've been leading a discussion group on Bhakti Yoga at the Jivamukti Yoga School here in New York for about the past 9 or 10 years. It takes about 3 minutes, after these discussion groups begin to go, wham, right down to real nitty-gritty practical stuff. what do I do about my boss? What do I do about my partner? I want to see everybody as a spiritual being, but really I just want to push them down a flight of stairs. What do I do about this hang up? People have real life, genuine, practical concerns. And they want to know that if I'm going to take the time to invest in, studying the Bhagavad Gita and chanting this mantra and maybe changing my dietary habits or whatever it might be, that there's something real that's going to come out of that. And Prabhupada knew that. When he translated and commented his edition of the Bhagavad Gita, he called it Bhagavad Gita as it is. That's a very significant title. That was a conscious choice, not only to convey that he wasn't inventing anything, that this is what Krishna was teaching without me having to interpret it for you. Krishna is like compared to the sun. You don't need a candle to illuminate the sun. It's self-evident. As it is has another meaning for me, which is that we live practical lives. Here's a way of understanding the spiritual foundation beneath our lives that can help make sense out of it, that can help make the chaos of our lives begin to look less chaotic, that can move us away from inaction to a healthy, positive course of action, which is what happened to Arjuna in the Gita. Arjuna was so traumatized by the duties of his life that he ended up being totally catatonic. He couldn't move. He had all of the symptoms of a meltdown. He said, my mind is reeling. I don't remember my name. I can't hold my bow and arrows. My hands are sweaty. I have to sit down. They were all the symptoms of someone undergoing a nervous breakdown. And Krishna, like a good therapist, walks him gradually, step by step, out of that traumatic place to a place of calm, a place of renewed self-assurance, a place where he could do the very thing that he thought he could never do. And that's really what I think all of us encounter. We hit a wall, and we don't know what to do anymore. And those are the moments when the chanting of the mantra, the Krishna mantra, the teachings, that's when they show their real worth to people.
In the moment of crisis, and so the crisis of Arjuna is a classical moment in literary history and human history, an amazing modeling experience. So one part of that moment, as Krishna brings him back to his senses, so to speak, Krishna reveals himself as Vishnu incarnate in this samadhi experience. In Ashtanga Yoga, this is considered like this is the high point. This samadhi, this merger, as you were describing earlier, is the final goal of incarnation. All these millions of years of soul journeys and so on. Can you tell me more about perceptions of samadhis and perhaps some of the experiences you had, people around you or yourself, the high spiritual moments?
That's always a fascinating question to be addressing, isn't it? What's it like? What's it like to be self-realized? What's it like to really know yourself to be the consciousness within the body? To know that you're an immortal being. What does that feel like? How would the world be different? If I come to the perfection of yoga practice, if I finally shed all of the limitations of being an embodied being, how would the world be different? How would I be seeing it differently? How would I be acting in it differently? What could I be if I reached that level of spiritual elevation? And I don't know I don't think it would be a good idea to try to encapsulate an answer in a few words. And I'm certainly not on that level, so I can't tell you from my own experience. But what I can say from having had the great pleasure of traveling with Prabhupada and knowing him is that here was someone who lived in that place. This was someone, a real guru, a real self-aware individual who had reawakened his love for God. I'll give you an example, one little story. We were walking in London in the early 70s, and this was at a time when his movement had already spread worldwide, and he was dealing with very, very big issues, meeting with prime ministers and presidents and being received by heads of state and, viewed as India's spiritual ambassador to the world. And on a morning walk, he used to brush his teeth with neem twigs. The neem tree in India has medicinal properties. So if you chew the end of a neem twig, it can become like a little bristle, and you can brush your teeth with that. Well, there are no neem trees growing in Hyde Park, London, but there are willow trees. So he pointed to one and asked his assistant, would you go over and please take a couple of small twigs that I can use as toothbrushes? So the assistant broke one branch off and then reached out and broke a second one. And he was reaching out to take a third, and Prabhupada put his hand up and said, no, that's enough. Don't disturb the tree more than necessary. The idea of someone who was engaged with so many, important issues of global consequence, not wanting to disturb a tree more than necessary. That says something about him. When he first came over to New York in '65 and had no money and no followers, no nothing, he was staying at a place in the Bowery. Now, the Bowery today is a rather chic neighborhood, but back then it was a place of derelicts and drug addicts and alcoholics. And often when he would come back from the market, there'd be some drunkard sleeping off a bender lying in the hallway. And so he had to step over that person in order to go up the stairs to his apartment. And stepping over someone is considered disrespectful in Indian culture. So he looked down and said, my dear sir, kindly get up. Now, my fellow student who was there when this happened describes that at that moment he understood what it meant to be an enlightened being. That here was a distinguished teacher looking at a drunkard lying in the doorway, honoring the soul within that smelly body, recognizing in this cast-off human being a spark of God, and honoring that person with sweet words and respect. That was Prabhupada. And I think that's symptomatic of someone who's understood the spiritual dignity of all life.
I hear in your telling that Prabhupada really succeeded in awakening the feeling of love in the people around him and the people that had contact with him.
Well, he certainly did that in a lot of people. I think there are some students from those days. It still happens today in yoga studios who treat the teacher as a kind of surrogate parent out of some psychological need. Perhaps they didn't get enough love from their real parents when they were growing up. Mm-hmm. And so there was this kind of displacement of a material relationship onto Prabhupada, and they didn't stay. If people were there out of an emotional dependency, mm-hmm. rather than out of a clear-headed understanding that this is a real spiritual path, and as a disciple, I'm learning from this person who is assuming responsibility for my spiritual life, I have an obligation in return to behave according to certain guidelines and to study and do my best. If it was on that other level, it didn't last. So, yes, he certainly touched the hearts of many people, but some people took it in a different way.
I'm hearing your story, and so there are different outcomes and consequences. Of course, the Gita emphasizes that we're not to be too attached to the outcomes of our efforts. But at the same time, I'm hearing you say that even in when the teacher appears, there are still different conflicts and solutions that will occur in the teacher-student relationship on the spiritual path. Even the people who had very strong, as you say, immediate emotional response to the presence of the teacher were not just necessarily the ones who had the greatest stamina to persist.
I mean, yes, even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself acknowledges that there are different reasons why people approach him. Mm-hmm. Here he is, the Supreme Being, in his own words, essentially saying, I know that some people come to me because their lives are really messed up and they need some shelter somewhere, right? So they basically just want me to be the god of their religion. They want someone to worship, they want someone to take care of them, like a parent would take care of a child. And, well, okay. He basically says, okay, if that's what they want, I'm happy to reciprocate with them in that way. There are other people who come to me because they see some opportunity to make money by taking to my path. By taking to a spiritual path, people have careers doing that. Mm-hmm. That's how they earn a living. Mm-hmm. And Krishna says, well, okay, if that's what they want, that's their prerogative. He said, but there's this other group. It's a smaller group of people. What they really want is to know me. They're looking to know me in truth. Those souls are very rare, and I do have a certain kind of special attention for them. So, sure, you can be at the right place for the wrong reason.
The right place for the wrong reason, or to hear the great teaching and not be able to make any sense out of it. All these circumstances, as you said, they arise in real life. These circumstances arise. These differentiations. I think in the Gita, this idea is that many are called and few are chosen is part of the, part of what's understood. This shaking of the world for this differentiation to occur, for the good people to awaken to the call, and for the people, the tyrants, to lose reign over whatever they're trying to control in society.
Sure. I mean, Krishna comes for those various missions, those various purposes, and it may be one of the great tragedies of our time. And I don't know whether the internet and digital technology are to blame. I have no idea. We want things cheap, fast, and easy. And spiritual life is costly, time-consuming, and difficult. So, Prabhupada used to say that when you're selling diamonds, not everyone's going to be knocking at your door. It's costly. Mm-hmm. And real spiritual life means making some changes. It means getting your act together, giving up harmful habits, kind of get over yourself and recognize that you have a contribution to make in this life. You have God-given skills and talents and abilities and some unique contribution, and your job is to figure out what that is. And if you understand that I'm okay, I'm an eternal being, Krishna is there for me, I don't have to worry about myself so much. That opens you up to be listening to other people and hearing. I mean, if you want that kind of reassurance and comfort and some purpose in life, are we so different from everybody else? Everybody wants that. Everybody wants to know that my life is going to come out okay. So I think the mission that Prabhupada brought to the West was wake up, get your act together, and get out there. Because there are a lot of broken hearts, and there's a lot of work to do. And I need your help. I can't do this alone. That was his mission.
So as opposed to perceptions of hippie culture, as we go back to this sort of laissez-faire passiveness, Prabhupada was an awakening people to a form of activism, a spiritual revolution, as it's described.
You got it. I mean, I think some people, we were talking about who were the people who didn't stay. When people realized what it was that he was proposing, that it wasn't just, chant and have nice vegetarian feasts and, nice music and incense, but there was a real calling here. They went away. Not everyone is ready for that. They want the easy path. You know,
People want dessert, but they don't want to eat their Brussels sprouts.
something like that, if you will, right?
Well, the difficult medicine that might be the one that's good for us. The one that tastes awful might be the one that gives us the most benefit. And but as you said, we've been conditioned to convenience, and it's a little treacherous. Our advantages, our Western advantages, may not always serve us to our best interest. If we really understood our true nature, maybe we need a little bit of slowing down on our consumption and a little bit of our impatience. And traditional teachings. Ancient South Asian teachings, it's all about putting in the time and paying the dues. Milarepa has to build the house and tear it down over and over again to please his guru.
Yeah, well, you're practically quoting Bhagavad Gita now, where Krishna tells Arjuna that those pleasures that seem like nectar in the beginning, but become like poison in the end, are different from the pleasures of undertaking an arduous path that may seem like poison in the beginning, but in the end is like nectar. Sure, that's the true way, is not allow the senses and our habits of what we find comfortable or easy to overwhelm our better instincts and judgment, which is take the hard path. Don't give up or look for an easy way out. I mean, we're talking about regaining our souls here. Doesn't that merit some great sacrifice? So if it means having to give up some familiar habits or change the way we relate to other people and maybe extend more compassion than we have, or get more involved when really all we want to do is just run away, well, then that's the price.
Yeah. So this idea that we can rectify our, the complexes and the difficulties of our present society, it seems that it's going to be a little uncomfortable moving forward. It's just, the solution is going to be different than what we've been doing so far. And hopefully, though, if our minds are absorbed in bliss, if we have our mantra, if we have our kirtan, if we are surrounded by good people, if we have good companions on our journey, maybe that will make it easier. But I think it's a certain thing that, at least from my limited point of view, that in some ways we're so out of whack here in the West with the reality of the universe. It seems that there's some discomfort coming up for us. If we're going to find a better way, it will not necessarily be easy to start.
John, you remind me of when I was a lad, 19, and first moved into the Krishna temple. We would rise at 3:30 or 4 o'clock each morning, and we'd start the day with a cold shower. It's a healthy thing to do. It gets the metabolism going. It wakes you up. It has a lot of good properties. When I heard that mental image of taking a cold shower at 4 o'clock in the morning was utterly horrible.
Yeah.
Doing it was exhilarating. So I think sometimes, we have this mental idea of what austerity is that keeps us away from doing it. Try it. I mean, I would urge your listeners, if they've been thinking about embarking on a spiritual path, but maybe they've been hesitating because they're not sure if it would be comfortable, whatever, discomfort can be a real friend, and we may have a misimpression of it. And there's something exhilarating in having a disciplined life. The word itself is very un-American, isn't it? Discipline. Who wants to, sounds like some military, exercise, and that's a very healthy thing.
Certainly. So again, yoga drawing from this notion of ancient discipline, ancient structured lifestyles to achieve a special goal, just like the specialists in different realms of endeavor, the people at NASA who make spaceships that launch from the planet. You know, there's special disciplines required to make that much energy move that far. If we want the great energy inside of us to move, we're going to have to, you know, we're going to have to make a few sacrifices, get our resources in order to make that great leap. Certainly, a very important goal in life, the spiritual goal of life. I think certainly in my experience, very important. I'd like to, while we have a few minutes left, is to go back to one of the points that you raised, to tell us more about the power of sound. In the Krishna consciousness movement, it's the name of Krishna itself that has this invocative power. Can you tell us anything special about the power of sound and the mantra?
Yeah, there's a whole section in the book Swami in a Strange Land which deals with the chanting of the Krishna mantra. The explanation. First of all, everybody knows that sound is powerful. I mean, you make the right sound, you can break a window. My wife is in her family's fortune off jewelry business. You clean jewelry with sound. You put jewelry in a liquid medium and then create vibrations going through that, and it cleanses jewelry. So sound has a very powerful quality, and creating the right kind of sound stimulates consciousness. If you think of yourself as this eternal being kind of embedded in this material body and mind, and we're asleep, basically, having been in material bodies for so many lifetimes. This is not our only lifetime. The soul transmigrates from one body to another, and that's not faith or religion or voodoo. It's just a fact that no one needs to tell you you're alive. Consciousness is substantial. You know you're alive. You don't have to study anything to know that. And you remember being in a child's body. Prabhupada used this example all the time. Where is that body now? You have the memory of being in a child's body, but that body's completely gone. The cells and molecules and DNA have been replaced by new cells and molecules and biochemistry. So in a sense, you've transmigrated. If you're, 36 years old, you've transmigrated 6 times already in this one life. Death is one more transmigration, one more change of material body. The consciousness sustains and continues on. The proper sound can reawaken our knowledge of ourselves, our awareness of ourselves as that deep Atma, the core self that does not change despite the many changes of body. And that's very, very practical. I'm 66, so let's do the math here. What is it, 47 years or whatever that I've been chanting the Krishna mantra. I'm not a realized soul, but I can tell you that I physically and metaphysically see things differently now, having been exposed to this sound for so long. My relationships with people are vastly different, thanks to the power of this sound, which brings to the surface a deeper understanding of who I am and what I am. So that chanting of that mantra, that practice of mantra yoga, is embedded in oldest of Sanskrit texts. It's nothing new. This is perhaps the single oldest spiritual practice on record anywhere. The sacred sound, the chanting of the Om mantra, the Krishna mantra. Every tradition has that element of evoking spiritual sound. And by the time he passed away in 1977, Prabhupada had succeeded in bringing the Krishna mantra to pretty much every country in the world. And he could rest assured that through that sincere effort on his part, the world had heard the chanting. And that's what he asked his students to do, was continue that. That's what the chanting is in the streets. And people may not know this, but when they see Krishna devotees chanting in public, that's an ancient tradition. It's the oldest yoga practice in the world. And it was there was a renaissance in that kirtan process in the 16th century in India, when Chaitanya, who was recognized as an avatar of Krishna and appeared in Mayapur, West Bengal, brought the chanting out into the public purview as a way of bringing the general consciousness of society up. So it's a very ancient practice and a very powerful one.
As you say, chanting mantra can be a public practice as well as an individual or a silent inner practice as well.
Absolutely. The chanting that one does personally, very often on beads, is called in Sanskrit japa. And it's a kind of a quiet murmuring or recitations for one's own personal spiritual edification. When I chant in the morning, you can see behind me here, I have one of these shelves is my altar. So I'll take my beads and I'll sit there in front of my altar with my pictures of my teacher and so on, and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and do that for maybe an hour or so. And that's, for me, that's my personal time with my teacher and with Krishna. The public chanting, or what has now become almost a category of music, kirtan, is a group endeavor, and it's exciting. It's usually with drums and instruments, and it's kind of a community activity, and that can be a lot of fun.
Well, certainly I've been exposed to the festivals here in Vancouver, the Christian community in Dallas, as well as here in the Lower Mainland. The exuberance of the performance is legendary, and the vegetarian food is absolutely delicious. So, as a member of the public participating in the community, I've received those benefits. And although I didn't understand the significance of the questions being addressed by people in that community when I was young, when I was first exposed to it, we had a very colonialist perspective on these teachings from India, being in British Columbia and all. But it was being exposed to that influence, so to speak. Even knowing what that mantra was in my young adult life later became extremely important to me, but I didn't understand that at the time. So, again, this contribution, this participation in society, even on this vibrational level, this cultural or artistic musical level, is doing something. It's seeding consciousness. It's awakening. There's something transformational that's happening. We may not recognize it immediately. It may be like that strange medicine that we reject. That pending tax filing or something that we want to avoid, and yet it has this universal quality. The mantra reaches us and touches us in ways that we don't understand. In my personal journey, I didn't understand the power of those ideas or those sounds until they caught up with me, so to speak, in my inner life.
Well, for me, writing Swami in a Strange Land had moments of highlight. The things that gave me the greatest satisfaction. One was to be able to unpack that mantra, to be able to provide readers with an explanation of sacred sound and the chanting of mantras as Prabhupada propagated it. The other, which I think is as important, was describing the confluence of science and consciousness. That's relatively new. For years, the kind of reductionist empiric model of the universe and how it operates has dominated intellectual thought and discussion. And anything that had to do with mantras or, India and deities or divinities was kind of all relegated to, the Department of Asian Studies. And it really didn't have anything to do with real life. It didn't have anything to do with how the world really operates and the things that are really important. That's shifted now. I think the discoveries of the last 50 years or so have, in particle physics and in cosmology, have shown us that beyond what we can perceive at the farthest extremes of creation, and down below the levels of the very smallest lengths that we can perceive, there's some greater mystery going on. There's something that's there beyond anything that we'll ever be able to perceive, because our instruments and our tools are just too blunt. We'll never be able to see what happens beyond the point of singularity when the universe began, or what happens below the level of, the smallest of small Planck length subatomic particles, because we can't go there. By just attempting to observe it, we alter its nature. So we'll never really understand that. What we're seeing is that in the Vedas, in the Sanskrit texts, the knowledge of that deeper dimension of reality is not something that you get like a gold ring on a carousel. It's something that is revealed when we become qualified to understand it. That's where the yoga comes in. That's where the meditation comes in. That's where the chanting of mantras comes in. To go beyond what the senses and our intellect can understand requires a sacrifice of ourselves for that greater purpose. And that's when we become vehicles for the imparting of that higher understanding of reality. And that was an important part of Prabhupada's mission that, I was very privileged to include that in the book.
When the waters are still, the reflection is clear.
Yes, very nice.
Joshua, it's been wonderful speaking with you. I've enjoyed so much your sharing and your personal experiences, and I think your book, it sounds like a great wealth of information that you're bringing forwards in this new publication. Can you tell us, is there a website for you or for your further works?
Atma.org, A-T-M-A, atma.org.
And there's information there about your classes. You're still leading classes in New York?
Yeah, there's information about how to order the book, classes, schedules, it's all there.
That's excellent. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we go?
I'm delighted that we had this time together, John. Thank you very much, and I wish your listeners a very smooth and happy road to their spiritual awakening.
That's excellent. Thank you again. Joshua Greene, Swami in a Strange Land is the book. Read the book. Atma.org, visit the site, find out more about Joshua's great work. Pleasure to speak with you. All the best. We'll be back again from News Inside Out. I'm John Kelly.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.